Okay, well, I will call the meeting to order, and the first item on the agenda.
Recording in progress.
Now, I'll really call the meeting to order again. We have the co-living discussion is the first item, and Mark, if you want to come to the table again, you're more than welcome to do so. Don't feel obligated, but there's been, Peter and I have done some more research. I know you've done some. You folks submitted at least one memo that was helpful, give some additional background. Deputy City Attorney's also done some research.
Come join me.
We're being joined by another planning board member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Paul. Do you have these slides handy?
I do.
So, sort of as a background to some of what we're doing, which relates to both the co-living issue and some of the other zoning amendments, I asked Mr. Bowen, who is sitting as a full member this evening, to look at the master plan at our last workshop and see if he could find support or lack thereof for some of what we're talking about. And he did find some support in page 124, I think it is, or 144, which, if you get it full screen, and then go to the next. What Bill pointed out was section 2.1.1, but then after him bringing this to my attention, I also continued looking, and in the next page found some additional items that I feel support a lot of what we've been talking about recently, including the overlay we've been talking about out off Market Street, and there's a lot in there about ADUs that we've taken care of, as I'm sure Councilor Moreau is very well aware of. There's a lot of support for that, and also encouraging smaller housing units and micro units. You know, I don't think that the language of smaller units and micro units had particularly in mind co-living, but it's the same spirit of that. So I thought it was relevant to at least point out that we do have some support in our existing master plan, which, as we know, is from 2017, I believe.
Approximately.
Approximately. Bill, did you want to add anything to your?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. So I want to talk in general, but also, as I mentioned, the Deputy City Attorney had some questions that have come up. I didn't realize, the city actually has an ordinance about boarding houses. And that probably would need to be modified as a part of this effort that we're talking about, and whether it gets relabeled as something different than boarding house. You know, I think I'm kind of a history buff, and boarding house to me is kind of 19th century, if not before, and I don't know that it fully fits with what we're talking about currently with some of these conversions and even some of the new buildings. So just as maybe as a preamble, Trevor, if you wanted to, I'll put your questions up just to bring things to our attention, and then we can get into a discussion as a full board and talk with Mr. McNabb also about his thoughts. But could you put up Trevor's? No.
Can I ask one question?
Certainly.
Is it still true that boarding houses, based off of our current ordinance, have to get renewed every so often? I think that, if I remember correctly,
Yes, it's an annual renewal
annual renewal.
for the permits, but it's very minimal requirements. It's really just renewing and providing additional updated
A little bit like
information.
the ADU.
Yeah, just making sure, even less than that.
Even
It's
less than that.
Yeah, I sent you
Okay,
revised
thank
slides
you.
with Trevor's
couldn't
questions
remember.
in there, and I added the question.
Oh, Trevor, just sit down. We're going to have more questions.
Pull up the microphone, Trevor.
Rick?
I have a question for Attorney McCord.
Okay, we've got a technical issue, so it's a good time for a question.
Great. I'm just going off of memory. This is like 10 years ago, and it started from the 21 Brewster Street. And I think at that time, like 2014, 15, there were 3 boarding houses. 21 Brewster,
Yep.
I forget the
Cabot
address.
and
Cabot and Hanover. And only 2 of those 3 exist right now?
Correct. Yep.
Have they been relicensed recently, or has that kind of fallen by the wayside? Because I haven't seen it on the city council agenda in years.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the current status of the licensing of those, but the renewal process is pretty minimal. It shouldn't be a big hurdle, but it's the issue is administration, right? And having.
That brings,
just wanna make sure.
that brings up another question. Whose department does that fall under, the renewals?
The city clerk ordinarily, but right.
So it's not in the inspection department, health department, building department?
That's right. It's not. Which
We need
leads
to add that.
to a lot of my questions that I raised here and what concerns you all have. Yes.
Thank you.
Are those commercial uses of the property?
So the boarding houses fall under, in the zoning ordinance, they fall under the same as hotels and other hotels, motels, inns, transient uses. That's what they currently exist.
They pay a rooms tax?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
That's up to an owner. Day rooms and meals tax.
It is? Why would they pay it if it's up to them?
Because the state can come after you if you don't. It's a state
Well,
tax.
I'm not asking if they actually have paid it, but is there a rooms tax levied on that? It sounds like it's a commercial use, not a residential use, what we were been talking about,
That's a good point.
the co-living.
But if I remember correctly, typically they're rented weekly. That's what people pay weekly. I don't know, and I don't think they have longer term.
Dates back to the old
agreements.
paycheck weekly kind of thing. Get paid Thursday, pay your rent Friday.
George Thorogood.
In the same family, is there anything with SROs in the history of Portsmouth?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Is there any history of single resident occupancy in the history of Portsmouth?
Do you have USDC?
Single resident occupancy. I'm sorry, I'm not following you.
An SRO?
Is this,
Different.
It's a different category where you got a room. And,
Well, in the history of Portsmouth, I mean, that's all it used to be before zoning,
yes,
So-
so they've gone away.
once zoning came in.
And are there zoning provisions that prevent SROs, is the question? What provisions prevent SROs?
I don't know the answer to that.
Because that's very close, similar but different than what we were talking about tonight.
I mean, if it's not, it's permissive zoning, so if it's not specifically listed, then it's prohibited.
Bill, I believe there's the only zoning district currently that allows boarding houses is general business.
Right.
And I think there's 3 properties around the circle that are used to be general business.
Yeah.
And also be aware boarding houses, is limited to 10 occupants, and that's on a property. So that's why it doesn't apply really like for us downtown if I got a 70,000 square foot building. I mean, if boarding houses were permitted, I could only do 10 units.
Right.
It's interesting you say that because there were, 40 rooms at the Brewster Rooms before it got renovated?
But I'm pretty sure the boarding house is limited to 10 units.
After it burnt down.
It was before it burned down. Trust me, before it flooded and before it burned down. It had like 35 to 40 rooms in it. Yeah.
so we have the technical issue solved, and just, I think there are a number of things we need to talk about, and just, now I'm going to speak personally. My personal feeling is this is a good idea. I'd like to find a way that we can make this work. But I think there are things we have to consider, like the ordinance that I wasn't even aware of. Councilor Moreau was, obviously Trevor was.
Sorry, I wasn't at the last work session to tell you that.
I looked it up after it was pointed out to me. Sure enough, there it is. And, I don't know if that's a police power regulation or what it is, but it's an ordinance, and so we have to address it. But I'll let you, there's two slides that have your topics. Trevor, if you want to just run through them.
Sure, and this was, I just want to give a little preamble here. I did a little research into the previous litigation that we had in regards to boarding houses. Obviously, the nature of those boarding houses is far afield from the what we're talking about here with these co-living units. It's really not an apples to apples comparison, but there are still lessons to be drawn, right? In terms of administration, in terms of the challenges that were posed. In those cases, the issues that were presented to the city, that the city had to work through, were all related to the tenants there, and then the ability or lack thereof of city staff to get in touch with someone who could remedy those problems, whether it's rowdy people or some issue with someone on site. So I mean, those are really the big issues there. How do we find someone? How do we get a hold of someone with with authority to make a decision here, to take an action, whatever that action may be. So that's why the permitting system really exists, is to provide a point of contact. I mean, that's kind of the whole purpose of that permitting system, is to provide a point of contact, to provide someone who you can contact. And one of the provisions, without going too deep into the litigation, one of the provisions of the consent decree that was entered into with the Brewster Street boarding house was that there be someone on site 24/7 with authority to act on behalf of the property owner, so that when something goes wrong, the city knows who to pick up the phone and call, so that the problem can be solved. So that, in terms of this slide, to extrapolate from that, when you're talking about administration on an ongoing basis, I think that's a one piece that could be a part of the ordinance, is having someone who's able to make decisions and able to speak with someone at the city when something goes wrong. But it's also, what things does the planning board and ultimately the city council want city staff to be monitoring on an ongoing basis? Is it just that, just making sure there's someone to contact, or is there something more? Because when I read what was proposed, there are some items like a lease that contemplate ongoing supervision, right? I mean, how can staff be sure that the property owner is complying with the ordinance on an ongoing basis? And it seems logical to me that be through a permitting system, unless the planning board and city council unless that's not something that concerns them on an ongoing basis, which that's kind of the feedback I'm looking for here. And is there anything else, ongoing compliance with number of beds in a room, ongoing compliance with the contents of a kitchen, et cetera. And then, and this really goes to more, the site plan review phase. What does the planning board want to see out of these? I mean, what's the contents of what does it mean for it to be a co-living unit? And again, I obviously have no preference, but I want to know what you all think. How tightly should that be drawn? How much leeway should be given to private property owners, acknowledging that you're writing this not only for the present project in front of you, but to be broadly applicable in various locations around the city. And I just thought that this would be useful to help frame the discussion that you all can have, so that we can I can work with Peter and we can get an ordinance that accomplishes what you want to see, and treats, again, does the thing that government is good at, or should be good at, and treats similarly situated people similarly, instead of having one boarding house over here where you can have a lease for 30 days at a time, and another one over here you're limited to something else, and putting more in the ordinance and less in conditions of approval. And that's really where, yeah.
This is a great list. Is it our mission tonight to work through something to this list, or are we less granular than that at the moment? I mean, our last work session, we all committed to coming back because it's intriguing, and we all, I think, want to make it work. But who's going to do the heavy lifting on these questions? They're all great questions.
Well, and there's some additional questions, a few extra questions in the next slide.
Okay.
But the answer to that question is us.
Perfect.
First. We need to get through as much of that as we can, because what I learned reading more of what's been happening nationally in this topic.
A lot of good links.
There's a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of conversion going on, especially in much more urban cities with vacant office towers, which is a different problem.
New problem.
Different scale of problem. Maybe not a different problem. Different scale of problem than we have here. And those are being treated with open arms, because changing vacancy into occupancy is usually considered a good thing, especially financially. So I think I added these, and, what do we call this thing? I don't personally like boarding house, so whatever the board thinks makes sense, I think we should come up with a label for it. One of the questions that came up at one of our earlier meetings was scale and location. Should it be different in the downtown versus in outlying parts of the city? And related to that, conversions of existing buildings versus new construction. Should there be a different scale consideration as we think about different parts of the city, which varies widely? This is food for thought stuff. I'm not advocating anything here, just things that came to my mind for us to think about. And I think, having a long history with zoning ordinances myself, the definition of family, I think, is a little bit outmoded for this particular use, and I don't think it's appropriate for this type of use. So I'm sure we'll have other thoughts, but between what Trevor came up with and these, and that's why there's another with 2 question marks, because there'll be other things. Again, I don't know how does the board generally feel, at least those of us here tonight, that this is something we should try to work through?
I think it's something great that we should try to work through. And all of the reading and all of the things that I've been looking at, it seems like you almost want to call these cohabitation pods, right? Because in a building, you might have more than one pod. They talked about the security, so maybe we could talk about numbers within how many people do you want sharing the same living spaces, right? And how many people do you want sleeping in each of the bedrooms? I think those are the numbers that I think are worth controlling, versus trying to think the entire building. Then that way it might be able to transpire between zoning districts.
It'll actually scale the buildings, because now you're putting 2 different levels of density, the density of number of residents versus the amount of supervision per resident, blah, 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 parking, blah, blah, blah. You could scale it that way.
What I found is there's a correlation between the number of people living there and the amount of community space associated with the people living there. And, I'm sure you've looked into this in a lot more detail than I have. But that's a factor here to think about. And I don't know if you, Mark, have come up, there may be a marketing consideration here too in terms of the label. I wouldn't want to call it something, that co-living space we really don't want, and, get an approval based on that, which is, I'm just making that up to be extreme. Co-living pods or something like that,
Pod sounds like storage to me.
It does. I was just trying to use a word to think of.
It's a starting point.
I mean, I think nationally, co-living is a word that is recognized and used in other models. So, not to be argumentative about it, I would just say right now, just, stick with co-living. I think it's a known word, just like a boarding house is a known word.
You can Google it.
You can Google it, you can find it, you can find ordinances on it. So I think the co-living is the best explanation of what we're doing on it.
And then you could define the number of kitchens, if you will, like you started out with pods, per number of bedrooms and a number of occupants per bedroom. And then we could come up with I'll call it a supervision level of number of required personnel per an additional number, rather than labeling it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, we've found that, if you want to talk numbers, we put forward the idea that you would have no more than 10 people in a pod sharing a kitchen. You can have as many pods as you want, but you got to have at least a kitchen for every 10 occupants. That seemed to be a good threshold to me to know that the kitchen facilities and the living facilities for that pod are adequate. In terms of the number of people, 120 square feet, is used quite a bit. That's like a 12 by 10 room per person.
Yeah, what I read was that would be for like a couple, but first you could have singles and bigger ones for couples.
I'd be a little leery on it, because just remember, what I think we should all be careful about is International Building Code, IBC, and International Fire Code, which the city of Portsmouth has adopted and does it, regulates all this stuff. The number of occupants per square foot, the sprinkler, the distance of exits, how many exits. So what I don't want to unintentionally do is put something that is in contradiction to or more lenient than IBC. So I'd recommend that we just all know, and if you want to state it, you can state it, that the co-living plan is subject to International Building Code and International Fire Code and city review. They're not going to let you put in, people in 5 square feet. It won't be a permitted use. So that's where I would recommend more. The limiting of pods, I think, is appropriate, just so you don't have like 40 rooms or 30 rooms off of, one kitchen. And some people will take it as an opportunistic to have less facilities and more people. And I don't want to see that happen because I don't want it to have a bad name. So I think limiting the number of people off a pod, just don't limit the number of pods in a building. Because like a boarding house, they said, if you have a property right now, you can only have one boarding house in that property. So like if I have JJ Newberry, it's 70,000 square feet.
Right.
The boarding house, even if I was allowed to do it, which isn't permitted in that zone, doesn't do me any good because I can have 10 people in a whole building. So there was quite a difference between boarding house and co-living. Boarding house is more of a transient. I mean, it could be overnight, and it's no more than 10, and it's not permitted in the downtown overlay district. So co-living, as I see it, would be a component, the pod and the 10 people, but it can have a lot more density than that in a building. And the other thing about when you speak about existing buildings versus new buildings, the thing to keep in mind that zoning just really never considered in many areas is existing buildings for their limitations. For example, JJ Newberry is deep as long. It's a big box. So like if we were to we can't do micro apartments in JJ Newberry. So we've done our layout now. We've completed since we last met what it would have to look like if we don't have co-living. And they'll be the most expensive residential units in Portsmouth. We have to do 2,000 square foot units because here's why.
There's the windows.
50% of our units would have no windows if we did micro apartments because we're that deep. We're a big box.
That's one of the
So
big
if
problems.
we designed a building like this, like a hotel with a hallway in the middle, we wouldn't have that problem. But in our century-old building, 50% of our units would have no windows if we did micro apartments. So we can't do micro apartments. Doesn't apply to us. We can only do co-living to do a smaller unit for JJ Newberry. It lays out fine for 2,000 square foot, 3 and 4 bedroom units. It does.
Sure it would.
But that's the only thing we could make work in the current zoning. So that's important for the board to consider that an existing building downtown, the larger buildings downtown, the ones that are deep, micro apartments don't work on them. So
That's a big problem with converting office buildings because
a
office
big problem.
buildings are much deeper than residential buildings.
And they're running into that in Boston. They're running into a real problem with making actually the conversion happen. So I caution, on the planning board, if you can think about that, if I could make co-living work, if I could make micro apartments work, that'd be one thing. I can't though, for that building.
So the one thing about the IBC, obviously the International Building Code will apply. We can't get away from it. It's absolute. But for the board to get its arms around a project, I think we need to be more specific as to the number of people, because that ties into, what's going to be added to a particular neighborhood, how many bodies are going to be in this building, in this space, and to better understand it. So I think that's why having parameters of number of bedrooms per kitchen, that sort of a thing, I think makes sense. And I think you said that.
It does, Rick. We support that by limiting that, the number per kitchen or, you can do it by bedroom. But we did it by 10 and we also recommend no more than 2 per bedroom. So if you limit no more than 2 occupants per bedroom, no more than 10 occupants around a communal living, you definitely have a cap on how many are going to be sharing bathrooms and kitchens and that. And that seems like a good control to me. You know, in terms of how this is monitoring, I have a lot of information, so you may not be aware that in the city of Portsmouth, there's a huge non-compliant part. So the way the zoning ordinances are in the city of Portsmouth right now, every single time you change an apartment, you're supposed to apply for a change of use permit in the city of Portsmouth. Nobody does it, but that's the way the ordinances are. So if Kim Jones moves out of my apartment and Sam Smith moves in, the zoning ordinances technically require me to go for a change of use. Nobody does that. Just think about West End Yards doing that. That's archaic.
Just a change in tenants?
Just change in tenants is a change in use in Portsmouth. Change a restaurant.
It's one of those
change a tenant.
outdated laws that nobody pays attention to.
You change a tenant, you have a change of use in the city of Portsmouth. So I recommend to the planning board that here's what we see happening. The fire department's been talking about, and the inspection department's been talking about. See, when you don't have a change in use, you don't have the ability for the fire department to get in and find non-compliance. That's where we all get caught in, like, restaurants and all that. That gets the fire department in and the building inspection department in because they're a change of use. And they do enforce that for change of use of restaurants. They don't for apartments, and some of the bigger abuses happen in apartments. So the city of Portsmouth's been talking about having like a biannual, every 2 years or maybe every 3 years, a permit required for residential to have an inspection. So that they get in these buildings. So if you have a co-living pod, I think it's appropriate to have some form of an assembly permit. There'll be a nominal fee, like restaurants all have an assembly permit. You know, automatically the fire department comes up. They know the expiration. They actually flag it in their computer if you don't call. They'll come to my restaurant, Rosa or whatever, and they'll say, you're expired, your assembly permit. And they'll inspect, they'll look at fire extinguishers, look at smoke alarms. So I think if you want any type of inspection on the city, the most appropriate way to inspect residential is through an assembly permit system where the fire department actually then issues. And it may not want it yearly. You may want it every 2 years. But that's what I would recommend if you want the city to be involved in inspecting them. But you also might want parallel construction, because right now the city does not inspect residential units. They're put in service.
Well, let's talk about that one topic right now, because the city attorney's raised it, you've made a suggestion. How does the board feel about, inspections on an annual or biannual basis?
I say necessary.
Greg and then Jim.
All right, so as a residential landlord, I'm in 5 towns, and it's been tried in every one of them, and landlord associations, realtors, everybody else comes out and they kill it. It's ridiculously expensive to do. You don't have the staff for it, and
Just to be specific, are you talking just the inspection or?
the inspection.
Okay.
The requirement for residential landlord and residential rental property inspections. The next thing, Mark's suggestion of the fire department's great, but, having ran for city council and spent a lot of time with the fire department, they don't have enough people to do what they do, let alone run around trying to inspect things small, like a 1-bedroom apartment or, an apartment house. Let's see, what's the rental statistic in this town? Something over 40%.
Do we have a problem?
So if you tried to inspect 40% of the buildings in Portsmouth, the fire department's going to kill you.
Well, is this a scale question, of single-family apartments is one thing, but a
Well, I'll tell you how it went
co-living
down.
of a certain size.
Well, I'll tell you how it went down in other towns. Mark's on spot that it would end up on a calendar, because I have
Co-living?
No, the assembly permit. Thank you. I have one at our facility, and they contact me. I don't know how many people in Portsmouth have assembly permits, but they contact us every month because we do charitable events out there, and that's how I got the assembly permit. But from a residential standpoint, the numbers are huge, and when it went to the landlord groups in the various towns that I'm in, it became evident that it should be more of a building inspection issue, which blew up there too, where good land, this doesn't necessarily talk about co-living arrangement, but if you're going to do inspections on any type of residential, you get into the point where building inspectors should be enforcing codes that are already on the books, i.e. dead cars, trash, bad tenants, slumlords. That's a building inspection issue, not a fire department issue. And so it got really messy because I went to a lot of these meetings. But Mark's had a good suggestion. You should start with the fire department because that's egress and fire extinguishers and those kind of things like you would have in a hotel. But you cross over to residential, if he puts that in place, then some guy that owns a duplex in Portsmouth is going to have to pay $250 per unit every year. And that's where it kind of hit the fan in other towns.
Okay, get your point, Jim.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we decided we're going to go down this tonight and try to answer all Attorney McCourt's questions.
I don't know that we're going to finish tonight. I just want to talk about them.
Okay, well, all right, I just want to see where we're heading, but I think I mentioned this at the last meeting. This is a huge task, and I'm really against reinventing the wheel here. And I think I mentioned it'd be great if Mr. McNabb or the city staff could come up with an ordinance they like that exists in another city in the United States, maybe New England, something close to Portsmouth. And then we could take that co-living ordinance and go through it, see what we like, see what we don't like. Because again, all the questions we have in front of us, I really think would be a much better use of our time, especially since I only got this meeting information like 24 hours ago. So I'm not real prepared tonight because I didn't have enough time to look at it.
Okay, I understand your point. I've done a little looking. I saw Mark shaking his head that he's maybe has some ideas.
Well, Mark gave us some great links here. We just didn't have time to follow them.
Yeah, we did, Jim, what you recommended,
Right.
and we wrote a memo and got it to Peter Stith, and we did what you asked, and we took it at heart, not to reinvent the wheel. And that's where we came up with these specific things, which is in the memo that we sent the city, which is no more than 10 people, no more than 2 occupants in a room, no parking, the communal space. So we
I apologize then because I'm glad you have that stuff. It's just that today I just was swamped and I only got this stuff yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, I got home from Florida at noon, and I got this yesterday. So it's kind of like we have this draft zoning stuff, which in my opinion is a waste of time and effort before we even get a chance to look at this. Because I'm not even going to read this stuff from the... It makes no sense. Somebody made an attempt to rewrite a zoning ordinance without accommodating any of this.
because it can get as complicated as you want. And that's where I caution everybody that I typically, what I do in everything I research is I complicate the heck out of it to be able to arrive at simplicity. But I don't try to write a complex. limiting.
Simplicity should be the goal.
Simplicity should be the goal, because then it can be enforced.
Right. And understood.
And there's something about the fire department too. Please be aware that, everybody that I know in the fire department really takes it as a real serious obligation to go through these buildings. They really want to go through these buildings. You wouldn't believe how many voluntary requests we have in the fire department to take the whole department through our buildings. And we do that all the time, even ones under construction. So they actually desire to get into residential units for life safety, to make sure there's smoke alarms and there's fire extinguishers. A building code official isn't going to have the power at this point to go in and find all these violations that on our grandfathered buildings that are all over the place. But fire, are your sprinkler systems active and been checked, and are your fire alarms? And that end is a responsible thing. And I don't think the city should be having in your ordinances the requirement to have a change of use permit, and they don't enforce it. They do on restaurants, but they don't on residential. So I think if they got that out of you got that out of the zoning ordinance and had a way to just get their nose in residential, and try not to make it overly complicated. You're not trying to get a homeowner. There's a responsibility to having property. It's okay if they go through and you have $200, $300, $400 of stuff to do, but there should be some level of inspection.
So we've kind of wandered away, I think, here. The question was on this specific application and this specific zoning area, if we would want an inspection, and now we're talking about the whole city, and I hope we're not thinking about changing the...
I'm only saying I don't want to be in conflict with.
Right.
So in this zoning ordinance that goes in here,
Yes.
we wouldn't want the current zoning ordinance that says every time there's a change of an occupant, a change in use, we're required to go to the city.
For sure.
That's all I'm saying.
For sure. But we could, in this case, for this use, we could require an inspection at some point in time to make sure that it's working the way we expect.
Correct, and not the change of use system that
Narrowly.
you're supposed to do, but you don't do.
Very narrowly.
Right, correct.
These are more operational, but they come. There is another study done by Pew Research and Gensler that Beth and others have seen within the last week or so published, which is more written from a developer-builder point of view. It talks about the economics of doing this and that. And advocates something in the line with what you're doing. We saw it at a state housing association convention earlier this week. So it's definitely a subject of the moment, not only here, and thanks for bringing it forward, but nationally. I've got a few small things that are more operational, and they probably don't go to this, but this is an opportunity to talk to you. From the homeless world, there are some lessons about people living there and what they need that I haven't found in any of the national stuff or even in yours. There's a question of pets, whether people can have pets. There's a big question of storage. People have stuff they need to store, so somewhere in your business model you need to have that. Probably dressers and some kind of closet space in the room that they have. Like a little bit of my granddaughter going off to college and what she needed in her place. So there does need to be a little more robust dialogue about what goes into one of these facilities from the eyes of a renter. But to me, the only, and I started as a skeptic. I see this, friends tell me that, this is Kappa Gamma moving down to Portsmouth. But the one thing that I do see as a questionable thing is the parking. And nowhere in the other research I've seen in other communities is there a thought of eliminating parking. In fact, in a number of them, there's a specific suggestion as to what the parking ratio ought to be, and maybe less than what the standard would be, but nevertheless a requirement for some parking. So it's probably a separable question, but to me that's a fundamental flaw of putting 60 people in downtown with no parking to go with them.
Let's not get stuck on parking. I've got some thoughts about that too. Paul, did you have anything on the question of inspections and just that annual permitting notion? Or 2-year permitting notion, or either way?
We mentioned the building code, and if that's written in, I would just say, don't name a specific code, but whatever code the city has adopted at that time. Inspections sounds to me like something that's going to add cost, when we're trying to address affordability. So I'm hesitant to do it.
Okay.
maybe it's something that could be done on like every 5 years, and it has to be, maybe we look at it definitely for this because it's something new and we want to stay on top of it, but it could also be something as we're looking at larger apartment buildings throughout the city, maybe that's something we need to really take a grasp of. These need to be inspected probably. I'm not talking about the duplexes or the even triplexes or fourplexes. I'm talking about the really bigger apartment buildings that might probably need some regular fire department, some sort of inspection to make sure that everything's, good for the residents, because it is a safety issue. So I would be for looking into what makes sense and whether we start here or we put a size on it. I don't know. Do you have to have at least 20 units? I don't have the answer, but I'm thinking the bigger it is, the more possibility it might need something. Does that make sense?
I'm on a similar page to you. I'm thinking the larger the proposal, where it's more economically viable as well, that might be subject to a permitting thing that could even be phased out if it's proven not to be needed after, it being tested for a while.
Right.
Well, and it's interesting, Mark will concur with this, I'm sure. In the mortgage world, anything over 4 is commercial. So that's one line in the sand that you could start to use. And then you take it another level where there are state-required permits. For example, boilers and pressure vessels have to be inspected every year. So I get, out at the place at Pease, there's only 3 guys in the entire state, I kid you not, and they show up and they want to inspect your boilers, and they look for the commercial stamp on the boiler, not residential, and they also look at your air compressors and other pressure vessels, and you pay them and they mail you a certificate, and then you wait a year for them to do that again. And then furthermore, of course, our fire suppression system, I have to have that inspected every year, which is a compliance more from an insurance standpoint and things like that. So there's a lot of overlapping stuff here that you don't really have to rebuild the wheel for a 20-unit residential co-living apartment building or whatever the heck you want to call it, wherever we're headed. So you got to make sure we don't over-regulate what already exists, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that, but if you have a limit of scale, if we talk this 10, like more than 10, so if the planning board feels it's appropriate when you have more than 10 units in a co-living that you would have a 24/7 person living on it, we certainly can't then say that you've got to have somebody that's $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year to live, and then at the same time complain about every 2 years there's a $250 fire assembly permit. I think for the smaller number of units, don't do it. So I would throw forward from our research and what we've done that under 10 units in the co-living, you don't need a person living on, and you wouldn't need any other permit. Over 10, you would need the person living in, you'd need every 2 year residential assembly permit.
Okay. To Jim's point about some of the stuff the links that you gave and some of the reading I've done, and maybe Peter wants to weigh in on this as well, I found a lot of the co-living that's being done, it's new construction, it's infill projects with like small multi-bedroom, I guess, buildings around a common area. They look quite nice, but they're a very different model than conversions of buildings. More recently, I saw some of the office conversions where because of that light issue, they're trying to convert the rings around the buildings and using the central areas common spaces, and they're having some code issues with that. But because office buildings often put their wet facilities in the middle of the building, they're trying to make it work, and I think they're making it work in Seattle for one spot. So I think all of these things do tie into the scale and location questions that I raised earlier. I don't know how far we can go, and I don't want to push anybody tonight, but I want to make progress as best we can so that, Trevor and Peter have some direction about where to look. So the inspection question we've talked about, the questions, maybe, would it make sense to share Trevor's questions and my
That's the
questions?
starting point. That's the
Those
starting
weren't in the
point.
packet, were they? In the-
No, they came about today, so rather than really up the ante,
I mean, that list is the starting point.
maybe if we circulate those, and then the board members over the next week or so could make some notes and share some thoughts, because this is a legislative process, so you can do that. It doesn't have to be a meeting like this.
So if you share that, can we, who will we send it to? You? Our thoughts? Peter? Okay. I mean, it's kind of cold for, I mean, we could certainly hit them one by one, but you're going to expect 10 minutes or more on each one of those.
Why don't we just do this, to wrap this, so we don't, why don't we start with Trevor's first, and let's just,
As
are
an
there
example.
any highlights you want to talk about tonight? And then we can move on to the next topic.
It's a pretty good list.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Don't string patting yourself on the back over there.
Yeah, no, don't start accusing me of things.
That's coming.
Overachiever, careful.
So if there's, we've talked about some of this, Mark's definitely talked about some of this. Are there any of these issues that folks want to try to touch on tonight? Bill, you got your hand up.
The on-site contact would presumably be one for one pod and one for 5 pods. You're not going to add another person for every pod.
Oh, no. Once you have a number of units, you have one in the facility.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have one for every 10. If you did, you'd lose any affordability of any
Good.
renting. It'd be too much money.
Good.
So as a weird note to that, 24/7 shifts or with one person
No,
in
we have
charge?
somebody, that would be a full-time employee that would live there.
Oh, okay.
That's by 24/7. We wouldn't have, you'd be on call. There'd be a person
Got it.
employed by us lives there.
Okay. Traditional
It's an employment.
complex manager.
That's why I said it's 50, 60, 70,000. You'd have
Yes.
a
No,
full-time
that's,
employee.
no, got it.
That's why I couldn't do it with 10. So you could have a threshold of 10, but I'd do 9.
You couldn't pay for it.
I'd do 9 or I'd do 50.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
I don't want to do 12 or 14 or 18.
Good.
Because you got to absorb that structure.
So, next.
We talked about the terms of the leases. It went round and round. I mean, is 30 days viable?
I am fine with 30, but I think from the takeaway from the last meeting was, I think the leases should be parallel construction to residential, not boarding house, not transient. So whatever the ordinances require for a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, which I don't believe is any minimum, but it can't be nightly.
Right, is it at least 30 days?
Less than 30 days is transient.
Right. So
I think
it's
it's
gotta
30
be
days
more
is the
than
minimum.
30 days.
remember at the state level, the definition is the length of a lease is the payment terms.
Right.
So you got to look at RSA. You guys probably know the numbers. You do. You're a lawyer. But
the top of
so
my head.
when you serve an eviction notice or anything like that, the demand is for the term. So if they're paying biweekly or monthly, that's the trigger to state level.
Well, we wouldn't be transient, so we would be
Right.
more than 30 days. And so I would say more than 30. And if the city ordinances don't limit on current residential leasing for a term over 30 days, then I think it should be parallel construction. It's a residential use, more
For
than
now,
30 days.
let's say more than 30
54
days.
More than 30.
And no
I wouldn't
sublease?
rent for 30, by the way. I wouldn't, like, I can do it now for my apartments, but I don't
You're
do
right.
that.
No subleases?
Huh?
No subleases?
No, not, well, I mean, we could sublease, but not less than a period of term that is, less than 30 days.
So the owner of the lease, if they sign up for 6 months, they could sublease?
Well, I mean, we're conflating things between commercial and residential. All our commercial leases have the ability to sublease.
Of course, 'cause they're
None of our
longer- but they're
residential-
longer
None of
term.
our residential do.
The commercial lease is longer term.
Yeah. None of our residential allow
Right.
subleasing.
Exactly.
I can tell you what people do now because they don't have individual. They shuffle people in and out. And
Yeah,
in
they flip
essence,
roommates.
They sublease without the lease.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a vehicle to be an individual and rent. So you have it happening now.
So in this circumstance, the premise is there would be no subleasing.
There'd be no subleasing. That's correct.
30 days, no sublease.
30 days or more for a term and no subleasing.
So we all want to think about these, obviously, and I'm not saying we'll stop. So should we move to the other list to see if any?
That's up to you how you want to go forward. I mean, that was a good discussion and
Yeah.
an example of what we need to do.
I
Well, I'm-
think one out we could have is on the fees. You could send it to the fee committee.
Yeah, we don't have to do that. That's not our forte.
Yeah, they've got work to do on a couple of zoning matters.
Yes, we do. Yes, I said on that too.
On that too, okay. This is a big list. It's definitely granular, but they're all important, I think.
And honestly, I think all of us could
Well, we've
knock
already
this,
talked
knock
about
this
some of
out.
them.
All of us could knock our own thoughts out in 30 minutes and then forward it to you.
Why don't we do that? Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense more than,
Could I just ask one question on plumbing? That in the literature and the other places, one of the drivers is to limit plumbing costs, so you don't have, if it's new construction, you have central kitchen, central bathrooms. In your case, there's been some vagueness in the way you've talked about the bathrooms, whether each unit would have one or whether they would be shared. Do you have a plan on that, or is that some of each?
It's quite a difference between new construction and existing. So the existing buildings, you want to optimize the buildings, which can lead to some in units, some in central places, because the buildings are the buildings, the lot lines are the lot lines. And then there's also a convenience and a consumer. You know, people value more having a private bathroom in their room. But yet if we did all that to all of them, then you raise the cost of all of them. So our thought is that it's really nice to have differences. So that if somebody can pay an extra $100 a month and have their own private bathroom in their room, let that happen.
can I help Mark with an analogy? You'll appreciate this. You've probably been to Star Island.
Yes.
Same exact thing. For the lower price point, you're in a building where the bathrooms are in the basement.
Right.
Swear to God. You know, so they're hotel rooms without bathrooms. And if you pay a next price point up, you get your own with a private bathroom. And, you know, that's how they do.
We do it in a brand-new building in Highland Center. We go to Highland Center in Franconia Notch every Thanksgiving. It's brand new. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. They have bathrooms in your private room, and then they have communal bathrooms for the same reason. And that's a brand-new building. Exactly what you're talking about.
And in the ski areas, they have ski clubs that have the same type of situation. And, you know, of course, that's a private club, but again, it's a hybrid short-term living situation.
And I don't think we should limit that because building codes limit plumbing facilities and bathrooms, and they require all that. For us, on our buildings, we wanted the ability to do either one.
Bathrooms are one thing. I think the one other related to that is kitchens. And I think as soon as you start combining sleeping, cooking, and bathroom facilities, now you've got a dwelling.
You do.
So
You do.
how do you feel about, I mean, some of these that I've seen have a limitation, nothing other than a microwave.
Well, I think once you have a dwelling, co-living is, the intent is to not limit a dwelling unit. It just becomes a micro apartment, though. I mean, you're gonna, as soon as you have all that in one.
So ideally, then you would see something where you would have a mix of bathrooms, and bedrooms with bathrooms, bedrooms without bathrooms, bedrooms with bathrooms, and cooking facilities would be the ideal potential in your world.
Yes, in the spirit of the most economical to individuals, I don't really see cooking per se in ours. What I see is more of if you just had a sink so you can brush your teeth and a microwave so if you're sick you can have tea, not a stove.
Well, that's what I said.
So
There's a difference between a microwave and cooking. So
Yeah,
stoves and ovens are cooking.
Yeah.
Microwave isn't cooking.
It's a kitchenette.
So-
It's a kitchenette. It's a sink.
It's
It's
a
a refrigerator
kitchenette.
and a microwave.
So I think
Maybe a cabinet.
I think that our intent is to have some kitchenettes in some of them, but not to be micro apartments. But if we're a dwelling unit, that's a micro apartment then. So, you know, there's nothing wrong if we came forward under your current zoning and we had co-living and we had these pods and I had 6 intermingled micro apartments. Nothing wrong with that, it's just going to be a micro apartment.
It's a different application. I'm just trying to understand it from a
Mixed
zoning
use.
perspective.
Wouldn't
Right.
be a different application.
It would be a different application. It'd be co-living and micro apartments, two different things.
It would be, if it's not coming to the planning board, it would be a by right use of sent to planning with so many micro apartments and so many co-living. You don't see.
I don't know that you're going to get a package of this that's going to be as of right. I think I mean, how does the board feel about that? As of right means you just go to the building department, get a permit. What
I don't know. I
I'm
think
thinking,
that is going to take more thought. But I have a question about this
Well,
list.
micro apartments
before we
are
get
by
off of
right.
it.
What do you need? Why, I don't need to come to the planning board for a micro apartment. If I have the parking and I have the residential thing, you don't have a say on that.
Unless you need site plan because it's
You need
big
site
enough.
If I don't have site plan, if I have an existing building that has parking and has everything I need, or I have an existing building within, I don't, if I comply to the use table, and I don't need a CUP, or I'm not doing anything to the site, planning board doesn't see that. It's just change a use permit.
depends on what you're doing. You might need a site plan approval, but you could constrain it, so you wouldn't. That's possible. But I'm thinking for an overall project that was already going to be needing site plan approval, because it's a big conversion, a mix of what we're talking about for a new use of co-living that had micro apartments, that's what I meant by a separate application. It would be all in one application, but it would be two different things
I agree with you.
inside the bill, that's all.
Yeah, in this spirit of this, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's
that
not-
If you had micro apartments, you'd come to the planning board, but you could have micro apartments interspersed with, I could have conventional apartments.
Exactly. It's going to depend on your building, especially the existing
Yeah.
building situation. You might find, because of the way the light and the air and everything else works out, it works out to have a unit of this size in this spot.
Exactly.
That's understood.
Exactly. And we have a responsibility to design a location that contributes to the community. So I may find internally, I don't want the maximum number of co-living in one of my buildings. And that I wanna-
Our biggest concerns, Mark, our biggest concern's not necessarily you, because you've done a lot of work in town, but what's the next guy going to do?
Right,
So we're not writing this for you,
right.
but you're helping us write it.
In that regard, and I know Beth has a question, how does the board feel about this in other parts of the city? Should we tackle the idea of this use in other parts of the city, or do we want to just stay focused on conversions for now?
Well, right now, isn't it proposed that the zoning will be in CD 4 and 5? Where else did I see? There were 3 permitted.
Those are just initial thoughts. So I really, and as Trevor said at the beginning, how does the board feel? Because if the board, and we don't have a full board, but
I say we just start there
with the conversions.
with it, well, because downtown has very little new construction, right?
Right.
So we start with conversions, especially office space, and write something for that. And then if it seems to be working, you can build off of that.
It's easier to do it that way.
I echo
It's
what
easier
Beth,
than
I echo what
building.
Beth
Done
says.
before.
Well, it's happening everywhere. Everybody's trying to convert buildings. And we don't have a lot of big buildings except for the ones out Commerce Way, and that's already rolling down.
We're already rolling
down
that
the path. But if you would go further south on Route 1, you could probably find a big building that would be a good idea because it's not working in what it's doing.
The draft in our packet says CD 4 and 5 permitted, conditional use for Gateway 1 and 2, and business CD 4W.
How do you
We
feel
have
about
3
that,
conditional
Jim?
uses and 1 permitted.
Yeah, but how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's fine to start.
How about the difference between new construction versus conversions? Stay with conversions to start things, or
Yeah, I think conversions is the way to go, because there's not a lot of land to start from scratch, but
Exactly, exactly. I think the conversions, the difficulty if you put the net wider than downtown overlay district, we can agree to disagree, Bill, but in a 400-year-old city where 80% of the buildings are built on the lot line, you're not going to have any parking requirements. You can desire them, but for
That's
existing
on the
buildings.
list, that's on the list, and I don't want to get too.
Can't have it.
Yeah.
That's a lightning
What I'm
rod.
saying is an
I
existing
get your point.
conversion
I understand.
doesn't
your
have to
point.
deal with parking. If you go
No.
into the Gateway District or other ones and you have land, you really got to deal with parking. That's why I think you should stick downtown to the.
Okay, these, Paul and Beth.
I'm going to ask my question, and then I'm going to comment on that.
Okay. Yes.
So when you're talking about sanitation/kitchen, what are you talking about? Bathrooms? Are you talking about separate washing stations? I guess I'm trying to understand exactly what the term is referencing.
Sanitation.
That's my question back to you. That was the term that was used in the ordinance was sanitation, and so my question back was,
What is?
well, yeah, what do you want out of a
That's my
kitchen?
question.
Yeah,
What
what
do
do
you
you want out of a
want?
kitchen? What do you want out of sanitation? Is it just what's required by, by the building code, or is it something
Right.
more? That's really
Do you need a
that's
prep
my
sink
question.
and a cleaning dishes? Yeah, right. Okay. I
require
understand
out
better
of
now. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. So, in the conference that New Hampshire Housing did earlier this week, there was a comment made that kind of blew me away. And it was a comment about how this country actually spends more money and devotes more land to cars than it does to people.
Oh, yeah.
True.
And that is something I think that we really need to start addressing. And in several of the things that I've read and all the stuff that was sent to us, it really talks about if you're close to public transportation, which downtown is, and you have public places for people to park, then you should not have parking requirements. But if you're outside of those,
Do you know how long it
areas-
how long it takes by public transportation to get from Austin Street to Home Depot?
I was still talking, but okay.
2 hours.
I didn't say
One of
public
my tenants that does not have a driver's license.
Let's let Beth finish her comment, and then I want to stop the topic about parking, because we're all going to be, we're
I just
all
wanted
going
to
to put in.
state some
no,
things.
You get to finish. But
I
I just
wanted to
want to
say-
make the rules clear. We're all going to be writing comments on this, and I know there will
Right.
be comments about parking. That's a given. But we're not going to settle it tonight?
No.
I think we understand that, so let Beth finish, and then Paul, I want you, because you haven't weighed in on this.
So one of the other things to follow on to the transportation is that we're also looking at doing studies on microtransit and really trying to expand the different types of public transportation that are out there. The Economic Development Commission's been looking at it. We've been asked on the CIP to put money towards studies and towards doing that. So I think that there is in our future, and I can tell you as the current chair of the Rockingham Planning Commission, I've made it my mission in the next 2 years to really advance public transportation regionally and not just in the city. So what we have now, I get is broken and doesn't work, but that doesn't mean that we can't work towards zoning that will work towards our future, which, and I hope gets better.
Good, thank you.
Eric, I'm off my soapbox.
I'm in favor of Mark's suggestion to limit it for now, see this flesh out, and learn from it before opening it up to more areas of the city.
Okay, so with that, if we share these lists and give people time to look at the links that Mark shared, provide some comments over the next week or so, and then come back to this with, hopefully Trevor and Peter can have a draft that we can talk about. Does that make sense?
I've got just one other question that don't want to take it off track a little bit, but Wells and Ogunquit and other such places have seasonal dormitories for people that work the tourist trade. I'm not sure what happens for Water Park, or Waterworld, but I think something. Is there any interaction with what we do here that might have an implication for other seasonal 2-month, 3-month places that people stay in dormitory settings?
Like employer pay?
Please?
Like it paid for by the employer? It's almost like a part of your job?
Like the J1 visa,
Yeah.
seasonal folks. I mean, I'm sure
We do that all the time.
I was just going to say, you hire them for the restaurants.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had anywhere from 20 to 50 at any point in time. Hotels all have them. Most of us we try to fit a square peg in a round hole right now by needing J1s who are seasonally. And unless you own the residential stock, you can't go to landlords and say, I want a 2-month lease. So the problem becomes, in our case, I own the property, so I can keep those off the market and rent them for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months legally as an apartment. If you had to go to the marketplace and do that, you couldn't break into the year rentals that they want. So it's a real problem. So what happens then? Well, you got a lot of illegal living. That's what happens if you don't have the residential stock and you have to have J1s or seasonal people. You're putting them on couches or in basements or in illegal units. When you normalize this and allow co-living smaller units and allow it to happen, then you give a vehicle for somebody who would just like to have it
Right.
and doesn't want to be, how do you do it? You know, I mean, J1s are real, they're just a significant thing. I was on one of my sites today, and I was just chuckling to myself. I was walking through, there were approximately 50 people working in one of my sites today, and I think 2 or 3 spoke English. That's just the way of, that's just what we deal with, and they have to have a place to live. And so J1s is seasonal, and that happens year-round. We have J1s that will be winter, spring, summer, and they'll rotate through.
To answer your question, this use will allow that to take place legally.
Correct, because we're not doing nightly more than 30 days. So
Right.
J1s are all like month, 2 months, 3 months.
Right.
And so to allow that use to be normalized, and which is good. That's a
Mark,
good
do they
thing.
have a lease?
Well, they don't because I own the buildings. So I take a residential lease to my company, and I lease it to a Rosa Restaurant or Martingale Wharf, which I can do. And then I can put occupants in there that rotate in and rotate out. It's frustrating, though, because, you know, I know most people can't do that, and I know that technically I don't even know if I can do it, but that's the reality. And
So what we're discussing here might be, in a broader sense, a partial answer to that problem.
it absolutely helps that problem big time for people, the smaller businesses who don't own property and need J1 or part-time.
Right.
They got to have someone to sleep on a sofa somewhere because, you know, they can't go rent an apartment. Before I got into that, I would check with some of my friends like Chin Bergen. He'd rent me an apartment, some of his apartments, but he'd make me do a year lease and do the same thing. So I'm just giving the planning board the information that there's a lot of stuff that isn't being met because we don't have anything other than expensive 1, 2, 3 bedroom apartments in Portsmouth. We have very few micro apartments. They're better, but we have very few of those.
Okay, so why don't we do that, and meanwhile, if you have some additional thoughts that you want to share based on tonight's discussion, feel free to send them along. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Hanover? Tony?
Pat retired.
Not leaving, are you? Not leaving us already?
Anybody need a break? Anybody need a break?
I'm good, but whatever.
If I would be useful, I'd be happy to stay.
Trevor, would you like to stay for just a couple of minutes?
If I'd be useful to the board, I would be happy to stay.
Thanks, we're good to keep going?
Yep.
Okay. Hanover Street rezoning, same thing. You folks, if you would like to come up to the,
Come up to where the front row or the actual?
you can actually come up to the actual table if you'd like.
The attorney said nobody will throw anything at us.
I don't know, I'll just turn sideways and they won't be able to hit me. How you doing, Trevor? That's good, how are
Over
you?
here, ladies. See, now there's more people on my side.
Yeah.
since I was over here by myself.
It's getting more balanced.
It's way more balanced, I agree.
So this one we've been talking about, and there's more to talk about with the, I don't know if you even followed this at all, Trevor, with the Hanover Street rezoning request. It came to council and then came to us. Steve's project has received a design review approval in July, I think it was. Is that something like that? They have recently filed an application for variance because part of the property, well, all the properties in the downtown overlay district, and the plan going to the ZBA is different than the plan that was approved for design review. And it's of a different scale, and I think arguably it's perhaps that plan is a better fit for the neighborhood, but that's what I'd like to talk about and hear from the board first this evening, and then you folks, the other folks at the table can chime in. We did have, and thanks to you guys for helping with the past history component of this, that was very helpful. It's in the packet. I'm sure all the board members haven't all read it, but some of us did. I don't want to focus on that tonight, because what happened, and it's unfortunate that the ball sort of got dropped at one point, but let's not focus on that at all. I want to figure out how we move forward and what the best solution is for 2024. And this one is very site-specific, because that's what the zoning request was. So with that as a preamble, did you want to say anything just to start things off, Peter?
No, I mean, that was at last work session, there's requested to have the timeline and a comparison of the character districts, so I provided the dimensional requirements and maps of where each of the districts lies within the city. We've had a follow-up memo from Mr. Wilson. I don't know if he wants to go through that first. I can pull it up.
Have the board members read this?
Yes.
Is there the variance, is that on the ZBA's agenda coming up?
I believe they filed the application, is that correct? Yeah.
They filed it Wednesday was the deadline for the November meeting, so it'll be on the November agenda.
So yes, it has been filed. Well, if the board doesn't, we can just have the applicant describe what they've got in mind, if that makes sense, just to move things along. Either one of you, Steve or Shane.
Well, I'm Steve Wilson. I own the property, and this is an allergy, not a cold, so don't worry about it. So, as you said, we came forward with a plan that, illustrated the current zoning at the site. I've owned the site since I think it was 2021 we bought it, after a flurry of activity. As I saw in the information that the abutters provided. But going back to the spring, we, doing our plan that was vested, we realized that there could be a better plan, and then we relied on the feedback from the board and also the input from the neighbors, which we got informally, but also at the meeting. And we went back and tried to take some of that input and come up with a better plan that might accomplish at least some of the objectives of the neighborhood. So we put the brakes on. We had a fully developed plan that we were just going to continue with the vested plan, but we had the architect and the engineers go to work on how we might implement that input. Now, I'll say that it was helpful for me to read the history today, even though we're not going to talk about it. I just want to touch on it because it to me is reinforcing of what we call the CUP plan or the modified plan, because a couple of at least the objectives of that rezoning request from 2019 and then 20 and then on to 21 had to do with the things that are really in conflict with having a smart development there, okay? So the first and most obvious thing is, and the first item that we've applied for a variance request was to eliminate the necessity of business use on the first level and allow residential use on all levels. So that's the caveat of the DOD, which was certainly appears to, you have a spire of commercial that comes out, which was Heineman and some vacant lots, and then you have a spire that is some 2.5 and 3-story residential buildings that sort of push towards Bridge Street. So you have these sort of two parallel but conflicting images, okay? So the back of our lot, which historically was a 7-story steam factory or steam producing building, and also a DPW garage, the Rock Street garage, has been completely transformed, so now there's only 2 of the 7 stories left in the building that we own, which is to the rear towards the parking garage. The parking garage rises, 6 stories directly behind us, and then when in 2020 there was also a vacant lot next to us, which is now a 60-foot tall apartment building, mixed-use building, but lightly mixed, and the commercial part of it faces Foundry, which we don't technically front on because there's a piece of property between ours and that one. So I'm just being thorough. I don't know if it's irrelevant, but I want everybody to get a thorough description of what we have. And then the front hat, which that is our bigger building, is set towards that area, towards Foundry, but doesn't front on it. And then the vacant parking lot out front solidly fronts on Hanover and also abuts the residential neighborhood that the abutters are describing. So we are certainly in a transitional area, okay? So the first thing is that we've applied for a variance, one, to not have to be required to have commercial space on the ground floor. Secondarily, in order to accomplish that, we have to be able to have a pure apartment or residential building there, which is another caveat to the zoning. So the two are part and parcel for the variance. If we get one, we still can't do the other. We could eliminate the commercial use on the first floor, but by one variance, but not unless we agree that we'll have a pure residential building there. So those are the two things. I see them as being directly in parallel. Now, why is that? Because a commercial business is going to have longer hours. It's going to have a heavy parking requirement, so it's going to compete with the neighborhood in a very difficult parking environment down there, which we've all experienced, and we're taking away the free parking lot, okay? So, so in that, we're providing all the parking for our project in excess of the zoning requirement on site, and all but 3 or 4 spaces occur inside of the building. So either plan intends to use the ground floor as parking, so I see those as being parallel. But I also have been to the zoning board, and without much success, I have to say, over the years, because there's not been, any lack of support really hurts you, because the zoning is the zoning. It was put in place for a reason, and I agree with the abutters that this was misapplied in this area, just the way the town has grown or not grown towards that area. It says right in the zoning that the purpose of that is to provide continuity to the pedestrian or experience, so you can go from store to store to store, except that continuity is broken way down by at Bridge Street, so that completely not applicable, but it specifically says in the zoning. So I feel like it's a good idea. I feel like it's in parallel with the abutters' needs. And I feel like that it's an opportunity for us right now to get one of the big components of what you had asked for in 2019, 2020. So that's part of our new plan. Now, if you look at the plan, what that allows us to do, at least especially in the two corner buildings, is it allows us to go away from orientation for retail, for instance, and face 4 of the units towards Rock Street with a much better setback, because there's some city land there and sidewalks and stuff. And then we provide a driveway and then a 2-unit building. But if you look at them, they're no longer effectively 4-story buildings. They're 3-story buildings or 2 stories with a short third or whatever. So we're not saying, okay, let's keep those buildings big and tall there and get rid of we're usurping the commercial space with a reduction in height overall. So that was a second sort of, the massing needs to step up and not down. Now, if you go in the neighborhood, all of these buildings, the one that's next door to us towards town is 38 or 40 feet tall. I didn't trespass to figure it out, but I used a laser. It's at least 38 feet, maybe 42. I couldn't, so don't quote me, but it's around there. And then the next building is more like 30 feet tall, and the next 3 sort of terrace down towards some single-family houses, a couple that occur across from like the plumbing place. Behind us is a very large garage, one of the best-looking garages I've ever seen, but it's still a parking garage and it's still tall. So, and next to us is a 4 or 5-story residential building, as I said. But this side of the project, which directly, so our existing building doesn't overwhelm anything by going to using the CUP, and it allows us to provide workforce housing as a component to our project. So it's not like we're doing this to get more and more and more. We're doing it to get more diversity in the project and a softer landing down to Rock Street, okay, visually.
Is it fair to say if you could do it?
Mr. Chair, may I just
Yes.
chime in just briefly here? I just want to flag for the board to compare this conversation that you're about to have now about this proposed zoning amendment to the one that you just had. They're similar in a lot of ways. You're undertaking a legislative process which provides you a lot of freedom to talk and share your ideas. But there's a fundamental difference here, which is that there is actually with this property there's an actual application that is pending before this board, and this is not a meeting that I don't believe has been noticed to abutters. There are some abutters here, but those abutter notices haven't gone out. So I would caution the board about talking and getting to the merits of pending applications, as opposed to considering the zoning amendment on its merits, in the context of the zoning ordinance, in the context of the master plan. And that may be really hard, and I recognize that, but I feel like that should be said.
Well, thank you. It's similar, a question I was going to ask, because we have a visual, and there's not currently an application pending before this board, but there is with the ZBA, as we pointed out at the beginning of the meeting. They've filed a variance request.
That's true, they haven't filed site plan.
They haven't filed their site plan application,
Not for the new plan.
but for the existing plan.
Yeah, but we're not talking about that.
The existing plan was approved under design
I'll
review.
soften the rhetoric. How's that sound?
That's-
We're having a general discussion about the neighborhood, and who I'm speaking to is, I'll do whatever you want me to do.
No. You
It's
can.
hard for me.
Steve, you're not the person.
No,
You can't violate your own due process
But we
rights.
don't. This plan is not in front of the board right now. It's in front of the ZBA next month.
This plan, sure.
And I'm not asking anybody to usurp their responsibility by saying to a ZBA member, et cetera, anyone.
That's not gonna
that
happen.
They
So-
like this or don't like it, okay? I just want, really who I'm speaking to is just offering some support for the zoning amendment
Right.
as it's presented.
You gave the
okay?
background, which I found was helpful. Now, my zoning question was with relate, because we do have an image of something that could happen under a zoning amendment. This is not permitted under the current zoning ordinance because it doesn't have commercial on the ground floor. If the zoning ordinance permitted this, that would be acceptable to you as the landowner to build something like this in this neighborhood. Is that a fair?
Could be. How big do you want to make it? So.
No, that's
you know
that's
what,
enough.
I'll
No,
give
that's
you-
enough. That's enough.
okay.
That's enough.
And
But now,
so-
in the same regard, we have some neighbors who have submitted a request to council to change the zoning in this area. The same question to them, is this in concert with what you had in mind with the request of council? One at a time.
I'll start first. Do I need to tell you who I am?
We know who you are.
Anyway, the first thing I want to mention is that the zoning request is for all of the property that is between Hill Street and Foundry Place. So that starts at Ferguson's at Bridge Street and goes all the way up to the property owned by Mr. Wilson. So that I want to clear up
Do we
first.
have that image?
Yeah, he's got it in there. It's coming. So in that request, we're asking that the DOD be removed and the North End Incentive Overlay District, which are actually downtown and North End things. We're saying this is not the North End or downtown. This is Islington Creek. And it starts legally, according to the city, at Bridge Street. And we want that zone. So you see the CD4, if you look at what we requested, it's actually CD4W, which would allow Mr. Wilson, if I may say so, to not need as many variances for what he wants to do. Now, I looked at it today and compared it, but I am not a person on a staff on the
Sure.
board, but when I look at it as a layperson, that CD4W that we're asking that whole stretch to become no downtown overlay district and no North End incentive district would allow him to do that. I think the only thing he would need a variance for would be his penthouse. But other than that, I think everything else would fall into that. That would be a question for Peter Stith.
Yeah, and I haven't reviewed this under CD4W.
I understand that. But the reason why is because the difference between CD4W and CD5 has the exact same uses. And there's very small differences between CD4 and CD5 in terms of land use. So if you look at the two of them next to each other, there's a very small difference in terms of how you use the land. And when I looked at his chart he provided in his thing, now some of the things are kind of written two different ways. You know, you're not comparing apples to apples, but the way I understand it is that CD4W would match, and he wouldn't need as many variances. I do believe he would need one for the penthouse, but Peter Stith would have to address that.
Without focusing on that application, what is it about CD4W that you feel
The uses.
better applies here?
The uses. CD4W is designed, at least that's how I understood it, Beth may remember. CD4W, we thought, was only allowed in the West End. That's what we thought, that was what the W stood
what
for,
the W
West
It
End.
was created when the West End character
Yeah.
districts were put in
Right.
place.
And the reason why it was, is because the West End has so many residential right next to it. So the uses are less demanding. They're less intrusive. they're more oriented, I mean, some of them are still pretty big, but compared to CD5 and CD4, they're significantly less in terms of how they will impact a neighborhood. And that's why, my understanding of that's why they're developed. And when we presented in January 23rd, 2020, although we're not talking about the history, we didn't understand that the CD4W could be applied in any character district area.
Well, a rezoning request can be whatever you want to make. It doesn't have to follow an existing label.
Right.
So it could be called CD8 with the
Right.
list from CD4W.
Right. Well, if
Beth
But you
has her
have to be
hand.
careful of spot zoning.
Right.
So if there's no CD4W nearby, you have to have a justification for then just putting it in this one location. That's
Right.
all.
Yeah, it's good to know that. So really, that's what we're talking about, is we wanted to remove the DOD, we wanted to remove the North End Incentive Overlay District, and change all four of those lots, not just his. This was not a
Right.
spot zoning thing. It was all of that. We even wanted it on the other side of Foundry Place. But that,
Other side being the railroad side?
no, the Foundry Place goes down the middle, right? And on
Oh.
one side, it abuts Hill Street, and on the other side, it abuts the railroad tracks. So we had originally wanted there, but the agreement was that we would start at Bridge Street, which is where the neighborhood starts, and move towards Rock Street.
Well, absent, and the rest of you get your chance, but absent what happened before, your current request is?
No DOD, no North End Overlay District, and CD4W becomes the zone.
Because of the uses, because of the
Because
uses.
of the use, yeah. And it's also a little bit more open space. It has some other things that are more community-oriented, if you compare the
Okay.
two. I don't have a printout of that,
Okay,
but.
I think
I do.
you do.
Did you bring CD4W?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you show it to Mr. Wilson? Because he's probably going to be the one.
I just
Yes,
looked
I
at
gave
it.
it.
Oh, good.
You don't have to go, we'll check that, but if you could either agree with the things that Liz just said, or add to it, disagree?
I agree with everything Liz said. The only additional thing is that CD4L1 is on the Hanover Street side, is to continue the CD4L1 to across. You can see in the front, which is the empty parking lot, which also would address the new design, that the CUP. So this,
I'll just, because I want this to be productive, the two things you're talking about, we would comply significantly with either of them except the minimum lot area per unit. So that would cut the size of the project in half. And that's really a non-starter for
For the
us.
CD4L1 you're talking.
CD4 doesn't have a minimum lot size, but I think first of all, CD4 is a lot more in line with your neighborhood. You don't have all this open space around the other properties in the area. I don't know which house you live in, it doesn't matter, but like the church and the other houses that are right in front of that and directly adjacent do not have necessarily 3,500. If you look at our letter, you'll see that requirement. But I just want to say, I'm not here to discuss waiting for a zoning change to allow
already
this.
vested,
What I'm doing
right.
is I'm trying to get my better, closer, not
Right.
exactly, but it is, if you read the letter that I sent out, in the character, and I'm sorry that I didn't bring copies of that for you guys, but it does match the character, because most of the houses in the neighborhood don't conform to CD4W or CDL1.
CD4L1.
Yeah,
You're talking about
CDL1.
CD4L1 is where you would run into a
Almost no
problem.
properties in town.
Right.
In
But that would only
this
be-
district you're proposing, or in your neighborhood that you're trying to match to our neighborhood, almost every property in the neighborhood doesn't apply to that, so I think it's a little bit of a bridge too far.
Okay, well, we understand your concern about the lot
So, yeah,
size.
I mean, I'm just
and-
wanting to say it out loud,
Yep,
because it needs,
yep.
because,
But I think you had some more things you wanted to.
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
no, that was
Maybe
the
not.
only thing, is
Okay.
the front, which is the empty parking lot, which is to continue the CD4L1 on that side, because it's what's in the area around it. The opposite across the street is CD4L1, and then the rest of it is all GRC, general residential.
Well, I mean, I'm here to support Liz and Robin. My understanding, and forgive my ignorance, is I thought tonight was solely about the zoning and the understanding that there had been a grave injustice, in my opinion, of it being improperly zoned. And I see his project as a totally separate issue because he's vested, and whatever he chooses to build, he's going to need variances. This, I don't see why he's, I mean, he is an owner of land in the neighborhood, but his project, this, to me, was supposed to be a separate issue. Because what's done is done. But what we're looking at is the future and trying to correct what wasn't previously corrected.
Okay, well, whether.
So at any rate, I agree with them, and I don't think this was intended to be about Mr. Wilson. It was, do you know what I mean? I mean, I know his buildings, whatever he builds is going to be there, but.
Point taken. I think, as Attorney McCourt pointed out, he's a landowner. He owns part of the property here. That's why, and he has an application that was approved under design review, so I think it's relevant how that
His
created
first
the
application
catalyst
was approved, or?
for design review. That vested the zoning.
Right. But but now you're putting forth a new design.
No, is it okay if I speak to that? No, I'm not. My intention is to try to cooperate with the needs of the neighborhood by having a new design. It's the new design that's requiring zoning. And if I don't get support for it, it's probably not going to happen. And so,
Now, this
and
is
you're
my question.
you're proposing to change the zoning for my property.
Right.
So I
And
don't
you are a
think there
stakeholder,
could
I
be any
understand
more
that.
relevance for me sitting here.
No,
We're not
I agree
changing it
that.
for your house, we're changing it for me.
No, I acknowledge and agree you're a
And if
stakeholder
you
in the
change
neighborhood.
it, it isn't going to affect Plan A. We're going to go ahead with it.
How would it, I'm
Okay, well,
breaking my own rule here, but how
we're
would it
getting,
affect
we're
Plan B?
getting a
No,
little
I'm
bit.
just saying, I'm in the neighborhood, it's affecting
You have
the
every
zone,
right to be
so-
sitting here, that's not an issue, that's not an issue. So,
Thank you.
we understand the specifics with regard to your site, we understand a concern you have about this potential zoning change. And we understand, I think, what you're proposing for a zoning change. I think the board understand what the folks are proposing. So, how does the board feel about what they've heard?
It sounds like we're facilitating a meeting of the Islington Creek neighborhood. I mean, Steve is a property owner, he's a neighbor, and I don't think you need us. I think, you should be meeting somewhere in the neighborhood. and
That's a
resolving
different
these
thing. I think
issues.
the idea of garnering support for an application is not in this room. That's separate, as you pointed out. The council has asked us to look at a proposed zoning amendment for this area. This process, by the way, in my opinion, gets us completely away from spot zoning. Spot zoning is it's like sinkholes. People use the term all the time and they don't know what they're talking about. So don't worry about that. This process keeps us away from that horrible label. And it doesn't have to fit. Whatever the planning board makes a recommendation to council can be CD4W. It can be something new, as I said before, that could list the uses in CD4W, but maybe not have a lot size component to it, or whatever the board wanted to make for recommendation, the board can make. But that's why I want to hear how the board's thinking. Greg.
Yeah, I think we need to pare this down to three key things, and you started with the first one. Everything that went wrong in 2019 or whenever that was is not going to get righted tonight.
No.
He's already approved to build something the neighborhood hates. The second part is to understand the process. And the process is confusing enough for us that Trevor's here. So when you take it past us and try to wrap your heads around it from a residential standpoint, move on to point 3, I think Liz, as accurately as she usually does, has come up with a 90% solution that is going to give you guys in the neighborhood a better product. And we're here really to talk about Liz's solution, which is 90% there and to see if the applicant has any desire to consider that, even though he's already vested for something that nobody in the neighborhood likes. So he's being the gentleman, and Liz is being the solution, and we're being the moderators or mediators. So I think we need to stick with those three kind of key points of this.
Can I say something?
Go ahead, Liz.
Thank you. The original plan did include the CD4L1 there, because that whole, all of Hanover Street is CD4L1. But in all honesty, he can still do what he wants. It just protects us if in the future somebody comes along, 30 years from now and says, Steve and I will be gone by then, and says, hey, we want to demolish this, and this is what we're going to put here.
Because
So-
of the existing zoning.
Right, so the front part of the lot, which was originally empty, we did request that it be CD4L1, because if you look, where is it right there? The rest of the street, of Hanover Street there, so that's the front part, should match that zoning. It's all CD4L1 there on both sides of Hanover Street.
So
And that
is
was
your
why-
request CD4L1 or is it CD4W?
CD4W is for the back part, so CD4L1 is, we're splitting his lot, which I know you don't like to do, but the CD4L1 was what we wanted on the front. And the
On Hanover
CD4
Street.
On Hanover, and on the ones that run parallel to Foundry Place to be CD4W. Because his lot, as well as the lot where Ferguson's is, I don't know what the other name of it, I'd always call it Ferguson's Plumbing, that lot are both undeveloped. Although he's already locked into his plan. He can put whatever he wants there within reason, because he's got one plan that's locked in, and his second plan is a reasonable offer. The reason for changing it is because of the uses and because of the fact that it locks it in for those other lots, but it also protects the neighborhood in the future from becoming what's happening at the north end. The north end has become very large buildings, doesn't look at all like it did when people who lived here all their lives know. It's change, but there's a difference between causing change in an isolated place that's like a little island there, as opposed to right in the middle of a neighborhood. So it's CD4W for the back part of everything that goes on Foundry Place, that abuts Foundry Place, and the front lot, CD4L1, to match the rest of the neighborhood. And there's no problem for him because he already has that, but he'll need variances to be able to, his zoning won't change, right?
Let's stop talking about his application.
Okay, sure.
And let's just focus on your specific request.
Right.
Which is CD4L1 on Hanover Street.
Right.
Splitting to CD4W.
Bridge to Rock, right?
That's correct.
Bridge
Yes,
to Rock.
Thank you.
And then
That's
south side of Foundry.
no
Bridge.
downtown overlay district on
Right.
top, no North End incentive overlay on top.
Correct.
So it's those four things.
Correct.
Is that fair?
Yeah, and to clarify, I think what she said, where it's the Fergus is now, it's been everything, but then Gary's Beverage, or now it's called something else, those ones on Bridge Street, the idea is you can't build something bigger there than you can further down Hanover, correct?
And the other thing to look at, too, is realistically, when this was rezoned, they put CD4L2 next to the GRC and the CD4L1, which is a real indicator to you that the busiest street, one of the busiest streets in Portsmouth, has only CD4L2 compared to the one that's right in the middle of the neighborhood has CD5 to indicate the real miszoning that happened there. So.
To clarify one thing you said, I don't mind splitting zoning at the back lot lines. This is a corner lot. It's kind of tough to figure out where the back lot line is, but it's not hard to figure out where you're proposing the change.
Well,
So
they have, it's already highlighted on there. See how it's,
Right.
oh, that's the building.
well, that's
yeah.
the building.
Yeah.
So, but it's roughly what you're talking about.
Right.
Yes,
Can I
Beth.
make one comment? It makes no sense that CD5 is in between Brewery and, is that Rock? Yeah, Rock. Yeah. Like, it's sort of, I think that you need to go all the way down to that if you're going to change
Wait,
it.
is that where Peter Happy's
Yes,
property
Yeah,
is?
and he
Yes.
doesn't want to change.
Yeah,
Yeah, he said he, I don't know what you're going to do with his property.
yeah.
But we've opted to let that, not include that in
It
our
would be on
request.
an island if you leave it there.
Yeah.
Well, it is now. I mean, but that's the sort of thing that the planning board can make a recommendation about. And that's what we're supposed to do. So when something comes to us.
I'm trying to stay out of the conversation, just
Yeah,
wait things out.
I just want to piggyback on something Liz said and try to say something productive here. I know one major concern a lot of the neighbors had when we've met is the roads. Like CD5 zoning doesn't match those roads if you've ever driven your car through the neighborhood, and not Islington, but on Hanover and then to McDonough or any of the side streets. I mean, yeah, Sudbury, the streets are very narrow and really cannot accommodate
They're yield
huge
streets.
depth. And even, I mean, I leave very early in the morning to go to work, and even then, I'm like, if this is like 6:10 in the morning, trying to navigate, what does this look like with more you know, I guess the streets have to match the zoning, and I'll stop at that.
Good point. Thank you. Trevor, are you okay with where this conversation's going?
It's lovely, thank you.
I say thank you for keeping everyone on track.
Just checking, just to be sure. So what's the board think? Do we want to propose a recommendation to council now? Do you want to think about it?
So what
We
is,
can't vote tonight, but,
what is the recommendation?
well, the question that's been put to us is to rezone where the hand is on the corner, down.
Where is this summarized in what I've been provided with? I'm looking through here, but I'm looking for like,
I think it's in the
So-
memo.
what you're about to
Robin's going to help you with that. Gotta get her
articulate.
notebook.
There's a graph.
Yeah, I'm just looking for, where is this, you're making a request for rezoning. Where is this articulated line by line in a legal?
you summarize it?
There's
into one
there's
paragraph.
nothing that we've gotten that mentions
No.
CD4W.
That's correct, because the uses are
So
CD4.
There's a letter in the Hanover Street meeting materials from 9/26
Okay.
on the meeting. If you click on that, there's a letter from July 10th. That's the one that was referred down to the planning board from council.
That's why I was trying to summarize it so that we could understand it more simply, because I didn't want to get too far into the weeds of what happened in years past. So what's being discussed is to change,
These properties.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it, I'm just,
this to CD4L1, correct? Remove the downtown overlay, which comes along the yellow line, remove the north end incentive, and to change, not sure where the street is, something like this to CD4W.
All the way to Bridge.
All the way to Bridge, all the way.
Oh, up here.
And to move back the downtown overlay to Bridge.
Yeah.
So downtown overlay would go. This is saying downtown overlay.
That was a compromise we made when we talked to Juliet, that literally that line would go right down.
Juliet's
the
not here, so
I know.
tonight,
So tonight, I believe we were going to split right down the middle of Foundry Place and leave the downtown on the other side.
Oh, just remove it from the southern side of Foundry Place,
Yeah.
the downtown overlay.
Yeah, because,
Then it'll luckily look like a long finger.
yeah, and put the,
From a zoning perspective, it would make more sense to stop it here, so you're matching both sides of the street.
well, because that one stops all the way. Draw your line down the middle, but you're doing a nice job there. So it would be straight.
I'll have him draw.
He's drawing.
That, I'm assuming.
Yes, that would be where, and the same thing with the North End Incentive Overlay District, which is
Which is this line. The bigger.
the big
bigger
lots.
service.
And you can see it slices that one lot in half. So, and that's existing right now. That lot is split.
Right, this is.
Right.
Do the board members understand what overlays do and don't do by removing it?
Yeah,
There's a lot of development in there, obviously, that's under construction.
I was going to say, yeah, except for we did identify the problem of that weird little CD5, which Beth said would be an island, and that could cause more issues.
Well, it's already an island,
It's surrounded by municipal property
right?
They
on all borders.
Can't do anything anyhow. in theory.
In theory, you can, but.
Mr. Smith has a hand up.
I see that.
Is it okay?
Sorry.
I mean, I want to speak not to my development, to what's going on here, and sort of further explanation. So the CDW is a new thing to me for tonight, so I haven't been able to do the research on it, but I'll recommend that, first of all, I don't see any CDW. Where else is there CDW on here?
Up, it's not there, it's up by Hannaford.
It's the
Okay.
Reese
So
property.
we're going to take this little piece and usurp all the zoning work that's been done and change it to CDW, which I'm just saying, and I'm not being mean or anything, but I don't think it's appropriate. I think I see CD4 there as being a viable zone, but every property in this neighborhood, and I'll go right around, the parking garage, the new hotel, the condo building where the old Eastern Bank is, the building next to me, the building in front of the building next to me, the two buildings next to that are all built to CD4. Okay? So I might be in a position where I would say, it makes a lot of sense to change it to CD4, I'm just saying. But to change it to CD4W makes no sense. And so I'm saying that to the board because you're going to recommend something, but it's completely out of character with what's there. Further, I don't believe any of this neighborhood conforms with, never mind the part you're trying to change, it will take 6 or 8 properties, make them completely non-conforming, and they just are getting built. And the only property that what we're talking about is affected is the plumbing supply house, which I don't own that, but I'm going to say I'm being a planner now. Right across the street is a 4-story apartment building. Next to it is a 60-foot high hotel. The other side of it is Dwyer's Pub and stuff, which are little buildings, but they're not homes. They're commercial buildings, the store and all of that. So I would ask the board to consider that, and I think coming in here and saying, well, we're going to make it CDW because we didn't know about it before, is kind of doesn't justify doing it, but I want to support this new zoning. So me, as a property owner, okay, and as not a resident, because I'm not, but as somebody who's in the area. So we want it to be a clear picture to the board. We're talking about 2 properties, mine, which is already vested, and the plumbing supply house, which is surrounded by monster buildings right now. So that would restrict that property. CDW has significant more restrictions, I think, as does CDL1.
That's not the same.
But even, no, I haven't had a chance to
Look at it.
research it.
Can you bring it up?
So if you could tell me what the differences are, but let me finish my
Yeah, go ahead.
spiel, and that is that even CDL1, I'd ask you to look at which properties in this whole picture that we're looking at right now comply with CDL1, which we're proposing to make these 2 properties. Because remember, everything else is developed. So you can have CDW here, CDL1 there, and they have requirements, which I plotted out CDL1 on here, which is accurate. And the front lot line build-out is 150 feet or 80%, so it's not applicable here. Nobody has more than that, okay? The building block length is 38, 38, 38, 4 buildings. So your block length is incremental, but none of these apartment buildings have that. They're all bigger. So none of them conform to that. None of them. And the building volume, I don't know what that means, so I'll leave it alone. The building footprint is 2,356 square feet as a maximum. Although the Hanover Street neighborhood, every single building is between 700 and 2,400 square feet. So you're 70 feet below the maximum footprint, or the minimum, maximum footprint in the area. So this really, it's not, the term spot zoning is not right, but this is like whack-a-mole zoning. Okay, let's keep this one from popping up.
I don't like that any better.
All right. So I want to be true to the people who made mistakes. I think we all acknowledge that in zoning this, but they weren't that profound. They were like the DOD and maybe the incentive district. I have no opinion on that. But I just want it to be clear that CDW is a whole nother thing, and bringing it up tonight is going to be difficult for the board members, as it is for me, to actually read it and see what we're supporting.
Okay, so
I'll end
just
it with that.
for clarification, I'm not acknowledging that there was a mistake made, anything in the past, and I don't think the board is.
That's my opinion.
I understand. That's why I'm just saying, you characterize it as an acknowledgement, which
No,
I
it's
don't
not.
care. I don't really care what took place. It seems like it was an unfortunate process, but here we are. We have an opportunity to look at it, which is what we're doing, in good faith, and if we can come up with a good faith solution, that's what we're here to do.
And Chairman, just to clarify, I wasn't talking about the process of changing the zoning in 19, 20, 21. I would have been at that meeting in 21, and I would have been speaking against the CDW. Okay, and so would the guy who owns the Plum and Supply House if he's smart. Okay, so it isn't like a foregone conclusion because you recommend it or don't.
Right.
So all I'm saying, I'm talking about before that, like we had a commercial building there. They reached out with the DOD to acknowledge the commercial building. And they didn't know what was going to go on between the two because there were so many vacant lots right in that neighborhood. So a mistake is the wrong idea. I think this neighborhood could have gone either way. And I'm just talking about the merits of this change, and maybe it has a better chance of passing if we were talking CDW or a CD here that actually reflected your neighborhood, our neighborhood.
I have a technical question that I don't know if Peter can answer this because you haven't looked at CD4W that much, and I know I haven't. Is it the massing of the buildings that's generating, or is it the uses more?
For us, the most important part is the uses, and the massing is a little less, but it's right in line with what he had on his chart. I looked it up this afternoon, and it was really right on, but of course, were you able to find it to bring it up, Peter?
The uses or?
No, the uses for CD5 and CD4 are identical.
Right.
The uses for CD4W are less. Can you bring up the massing? I think it's page 5A7. Not 100%. Did you bring it in there? For CD4W, you don't have.
Yeah.
Oh, you do have
I
it
did all
there.
the characters.
Oh, you did all. So there it is. So can you bring up both at the same time? Can you do a shared screen so one side shows the CD4W? You
You can only share one screen at a time.
I couldn't do it.
You can look, you have your list, right?
Shane
Nice
might
young
be able
man
to do that.
whose
He's
name I
young.
forgot. Do you have the list of your design plans?
Well,
They're on-
before we try to do that, I want to know how the board feels about how far into the weeds of this you guys want to go this evening on this topic.
So is,
We should summarize the goal for another discussion. I mean, we've whittled it down.
I think we understand, yeah. Jim, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I wish I was better prepared, as I said, but I pretty much agree with mostly what Mr. Maha's been saying.
Okay.
So I think I'll go with
It's on the, it's.
so I think the designation of specific properties aside,
Liz?
Sorry.
I think the designation of specific properties aside, what we're trying to accomplish is a transition, a proper transition from the more dense downtown to a less dense residential area. And there's an implication of the way the dominoes fall based on what you call it. And to me, whatever we would wind up with would be the one that, the decision that gives us with the best development of this property to accomplish the objective of having it be a proper step down, less mass, lower heights, proper uses of the property to have a smoothest transition to the residential.
Paul? You don't have to say.
Regardless of whether, I mean, there's a lot of different zoning in that small area.
Right.
Right, so I'm hearing what Steve is saying about, it doesn't necessarily make sense to do something just because it's available to plug in. I think there's a lot more.
Well, I'm concerned
to be
about trying
discussed
to,
here.
I don't think we're going to resolve this tonight. I'm agreeing with what some of the fellow board members said, but I am concerned about rezoning recently approved and under construction buildings. That
Absolutely.
troubles me.
Yeah.
Now, the uses that can go inside those buildings, perhaps, that's something that we need to look at and see, what they were approved for, what they could possibly evolve into with change over time. And I don't know enough to even think about that tonight, but it's not that hard to look into it. So I think that's why I was focusing more on the west side near Steve's property, which was more, he's got the one undeveloped parcel until you get out to the plumbing supply out on the other end. So you've sort of got this dumbbell effect of, on either end of the area to think about. And it is complex. This is a transition area. So I hear what you have all of you have said, what you've said, what you and your neighbors have said. But Beth, I skipped over you. Did you want to say anything or not? Just staying out of it.
Can I say something? While I understand you need more time to think about it and look at the very complicated zoning, which I'm not going to pretend to even have a slither of the knowledge they do, but there is an urgency to us because the reason why so many of these buildings that Mr. Wilson cited as his neighbors exist is because the zoning we put forth earlier was ignored. So it's like what we tried to control in the effort of keeping the character of our neighborhood and the city of Portsmouth didn't happen. So while I think you do need time to read whatever, there is still an urgency to it because the development in Portsmouth is moving so quickly, and I fear that we're not moving with it to control it because what's being built, these are 100-year buildings. I mean, we'll all be dead and they'll still be standing. What are we leaving the future? I always worry there's not enough thought going into, it's just go, 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 but what are you going to? So while I understand you need more time, I'm just begging, don't leave it too long.
Oh, no, this is not a stall. This is to try to get it right, to try to do what makes sense. And we could make a recommendation tonight that would be a mistake, I think. In one way or another, it would be a mistake. And I would like to avoid that, and I think everybody here would like to avoid that. But I'm not talking about a delay. Yes, now you'd like to speak.
Well, I just want to hopefully help. You could keep it moving forward by giving, you guys have all talked to sort of ranging around sort of two options, and you could put the possibility of two options to a public hearing, right? And have it at, a future meeting that might take two meetings, but if you start the conversation and have it in a public meeting and then continue it, you could then maybe narrow down to where you're going, just to try to alleviate it getting dragged on.
So there really are two options, all right? And each one has a set of dominoes that fall if you go that way. And so I don't know that we would get any greater wisdom out of a public hearing. I think that's...
But it gives you guys a chance to actually talk about it in a public hearing and actually hear from the public and their thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, the formality of a public hearing does give the opportunity of the public to actually throw darts at that one and, hearts at that one. So
Yeah.
there are things that can be productive that way. So, and I was thinking something similar, so. Yes, Steve?
I just want to be clear, I'm not putting forth any recommendation for a zoning change.
Understood.
And I think the easiest solution for this group, us as neighbors, is to support the variance that we're putting forward next month, and at least for the next 100 years. My buildings last 120 years. But
You won't be there.
that would be the best opportunity, because I'd hate to see me not get that and then have an inferior product, which is the vested plan. That's my opinion, okay? And we meet all the criteria of CDL1 or CDW, except the unit density, but we do meet the neighborhood unit density. In other words, nobody has more land per unit than we do.
Okay, that's a sales job on your ZB
Yeah, this sounds
application,
like a
and
start.
that's,
Oh, all right,
that's,
Dave.
Can I give mine about
Sorry,
my
didn't mean
tiny
to cross the
colonial
line.
house?
Put the cuffs on me, get me out of here.
if you want to have that conversation in the hall and do your lobbying,
We-
go for
I
it.
think,
Go
I think
for it.
as far
I
as
think-
zoning is concerned, I want to support what the board thinks is the smart play here, so.
I don't think we know yet.
So as a question of fact, that the ZBA recently, within the last week or two, turned down a zoning request in that neighborhood?
That's correct, they did, and it was because of the mansard roof.
Yes, it was on Hanover, at the corner of Parker.
Yeah, it was, they had.
I happened to be watching the meeting.
Yeah. They wanted to put a mansard roof there, and there's only one in the entire neighborhood, so it was not allowed.
Well, back to the issue at hand,
Issue
which
at
is a
hand.
zoning amendment discussion. I think let's move toward coming up with one or two, probably two draft options to get it fleshed out, what it would actually look like in terms of graphics and writing, and maybe move towards a public hearing. And get it to the board members in advance so we can all chew on it. That make sense? Let's do that.
Can I be difficult and just ask, what would the time frame of that be? And be realistic, I'm not going to argue.
It depends on notice for the public hearing.
For the public hearing, yeah.
Well, you're not saying taking it to public hearing. You want to see two drafts and then have more discussion and vote, then vote to send it to public hearing?
Well, it's up to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I would think-
thinking, giving the public a chance to weigh in.
We're at the end of October, you know, whether we could have that hearing this year or the first of next year, it's going to be, that's what we're looking at, I think.
Well, the thing you need to understand, too, is, and I know a lot of people don't, is besides the fact that this was put in, but we had a development that was presented in one way, which had steps, so it would be lower next to the buildings, and it is now 50 feet straight up next to a three-story building, so, and literally 18 feet from it, so there's a lot of insult to the injury, the original injury that you don't want to talk about. And then as developments came forward, they had an original plan, and then they presented it again later. And now I've become the vigilant person who watches this stuff, because you don't get notified when they want to make a change like that.
Right.
So it's made me a little weird, and we see that at meetings sometimes. But it also is a reality for us because of the zoning being so intense that legally you can do that. Do you know what I mean? They're within their rights. And that's why we want to see that change, because we want those rights to still be respected, but to also respect the neighborhood. And I believe Mr. Wilson is trying to be respectful of the neighborhood, but we want that in writing for that whole area, for that. So, I mean, if you want to do the other side, you're welcome to do that too. But that was kind of a compromise we made. All right?
Understand the request much
Yes.
better than
Thank you.
at the beginning of the meeting. At least I do.
He's got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for the time,
Okay.
and you guys too.
Unless you want to talk about it.
I don't have anything else.
That'd be great.
Anything?
Adjourn chat, people.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Now we are.